Hey everyone, welcome to this new episode of The New Critic. Today we're going to be looking at Season 3 of Prison Break. Picking up where Season 2 left off, Michael and a few other surviving characters from the previous seasons are now locked in another prison, this time in Panama, and it's called SONA. Meanwhile, Susan Anthony, an operative of the company, needs Michael to break out an inmate in SONA named James Whistler. Should he fail to do so within a week, there will be consequences. But as usual, and in true Prison Break fashion, it's far more complicated than that. Season 3 had a lot going against it. Like, a lot. Several major characters had exited the series at this point, and the fact that they were rehashing the same premise as Season 1 may have been an indication that the writers were running out of ideas. And of course, around this time, the 2007 to 2008 Writers Guild of America strike happened, so they only had a few writers on board, and they were under a lot of pressure to make this season work. But in my opinion, despite all of this, they succeeded. So the SONA Prison is a little bit different compared to Fox River. The characters don't have to be in their cells at specific times, except for maybe the evening when they all have to go to sleep. The cells don't have automatic cell doors, so convicts can leave their cells whenever they want to. One thing that I really liked is that if one convict has some kind of issue with another convict and they wanted to resolve it, they would have to engage in a fight. And the security guards will not bother to do anything about that. But if they see you attempting to escape the prison, they will shoot on sight. In fact, Michael's biggest obstacle is Lechero, a drug kingpin who's also incarcerated, but given that kingpins are quite rich and they have connections, he gets to do whatever he wants in the prison. He's the one in charge, not so much the police. And the most interesting part is that Michael's tattoos are practically useless this time around because this is a prison that he had no hand in designing whatsoever. Though he does come up with a plan to break out of the prison, and it's pretty compelling even if it's not on point with his breakout plan in Season 1. Some of the character development was also pretty good in this season, especially that of Mahone, Brad Bellick. For Bellick to go from being your typical everyday security guard to being a prisoner himself was very refreshing. Mahone also began to develop somewhat of a descent into insanity following Season 2. I also liked what they did with Sucre this season. Lincoln may be free this time, but he does play an important role in helping Michael break out James Whistler and the others. And for the first time in his life, he actually kills somebody, and it has a significant impact on him later in Season 4. My favorite character, Teabag, was a little bit subdued, but I still liked what they did with him this season. He becomes increasingly loyal to Lechero, but also does what he can to help Michael with his plan to break out of the prison, though he still holds a grudge against Michael. If you've watched the show, then you'll understand why. And I do like where he ends up at the end of the season. There's a couple of other new characters that are interesting, such as Susan Anthony, the operative working for the company. Inside the prison, there's Sammy, Lechero's right-hand man. There's also McGrady, a young basketball player who helps out Michael wherever he can, and he wants to get home to his family. The action may not be on the scale of Season 2, but it's entertaining to watch. There's lots of hand-to-hand combat and maybe a couple of gun fights here and there. The story also has some interesting twists and turns here and there, but they're not the best of the series, but they're still great. Despite only being 13 episodes, the pacing is practically flawless as usual. If it was the usual 22 episodes, everything would have felt needlessly drawn out. And every episode is crucial as usual. The finale was fantastic, especially if you were somewhat let down by the season, and it does leave a lot of interesting questions to be explored in Season 4. Unfortunately, Season 4 kind of squanders the potential surrounding some of these questions, or it just kind of ignores them. But we'll talk more on that in my review of Season 4. Now, this season for me is probably the most flawed, but again, it's still a great season. The big issue for me is that the story was somewhat smaller in scale than it could have been. I guess it's because, to go from breaking out of a prison in Season 1 to going on the run in Season 2, and for the characters to get thrown into yet another prison, and not a very large prison at that, with very little happening outside of the prison, and overall just not much happening throughout the season since most of the focus is on the prison. To me, it just felt like a bridging of the gap between seasons 2 and 4. It's definitely a complete story in itself, but they didn't do that as well as they did with the first 2 seasons. I guess this is credited to the fact that it's the shortest season. Well, at that time it was the shortest season until Season 5 came along. But it's short and they just break out of another prison. That's essentially it. Also, a major character died this season, but I'm not gonna say who, and at that time when I first watched Season 3, this particular character death really pissed me off. But after, watching the rest of the show and then going back to it, it kind of makes sense. So I don't hate it, it's just that I hated this decision at the time. And you probably will too. Teabag was also, again, somewhat subdued. He's very calm, very composed, and it made sense in the case of this season, but I think we could have all benefited with, maybe a freak out or him doing something crazy, as usual. I also felt that the general, the man in charge of the company, who was introduced towards the end of Season 2, wasn't in this season as much as I'd hoped. I get that he hired Susan to keep an eye on Michael and make sure he breaks James Whistler out of prison, but even then he only made like 1 or 2 appearances, and this also contributed to the fact that this season felt like just a bridging of the gap between seasons 2 and 4. And there are some other minor flaws as well, such as maybe some continuity errors or the usual requirement to suspend your disbelief or characters making dumb decisions, but they're very minor. So this video ended up being a bit longer than I initially intended, and I guess it's because, I just want to assure everybody that, this is an important season, and, it's not going to bore you. It's great. It's very, very underrated. Had it not been for the writer's strike, it could have been much better. And I would definitely recommend Season 3, although it will probably be your least favorite season. In fact, the writer's strike also affected many other shows like Smallville, Heroes, Friday Night Lights, Lost, and even the first season of Breaking Bad to a certain degree. And I hope, I can talk about those shows one day. I probably will. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Next time we're going to be looking at the 4th and what used to be the final season of Prison Break, but not anymore. So thank you all. Please don't forget to like this video, share, subscribe, and hit the notification icon, and I hope you're all safe during this time as usual, and I'll see you soon.